Hi, I'm TJ Harper. Today I will talk about one of the first Gothic-inspired cathedrals in the world, the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. This cathedral is an architectural treasure to both the French and the world. It was one of the first cathedrals and buildings to be built in what is known as then the French style and what we now call the Gothic style. There is so much to tell you about this cathedral, so it's important to narrow it down for this documentary. The focus of this film is the architecture of the church, the influences in France at the time that they built this cathedral and the influences that led to its design style, and a little bit of the history in this region. By the time I'm done, you should easily be able to recognize differences between a building built in the Romanesque style versus a Gothic style. And then you'll be familiar with the Gothic influence on Notre Dame. Also, you will be able to identify the factors that contributed to the creation of this style. And finally, we will clear up the confusion surrounding the naming of this artistic time period. So let's get started, everybody. The Gothic movement originated in France, true to France's modern-day reputation of being the mecca of style and art. France in the 12th century was also very forward-thinking. In 1163, when Archbishop Maurice de Sully felt that the church that sat on the Seine River in Paris, also known as the Cathedral of Saint-Étienne, no longer served the need of the Parisians, he declared that a new church should be built, one that was grand, in the French style, one that reached to the heavens and connected the parishioners to God. It was this decree that led to the building of one of the most famous and most visited cathedrals in the world, the Notre Dame. It is interesting to note that most think the church was built in reaction and response to what had been the style of the day, the Romanesque style. Most experts feel that the Romanesque period spanned from 1000 to 1200 AD. The construction of this church started in 1163, so right on the cusp of the transition from Romanesque to Gothic art styles. So we will also quickly touch on Romanesque architecture because it will help you appreciate Gothic art style and to see the differences between the two. The Gothic time period spanned from 1130 AD to the late 1500s. The four major phases in this time period were the Early Gothic, the High Gothic, the Rayonnade, and the Flamboyant styles. 1163 to 1253 was when most of the construction was completed on the cathedral. Additions were made, however, and these additions were built in the style of the specific phase in Gothic architecture that they were built. For this reason, you can see the elements of the entire Gothic phase throughout the cathedral. So now that you have been given some background about the Gothic time period and the Notre Dame's construction, let's start to take a look at characteristics of buildings built in the Romanesque and Gothic time periods. Features of Romanesque architecture include heavy, thick walls built from large stone, semicircular arches, small windows, sturdy pillars, large towers, and vaulted ceilings. Notice the floor plans between the Romanesque and Gothic. The Romanesque floor plan is shorter and a lot more broad, while the Gothic floor plan is very narrow and a lot longer. Here are some examples of Romanesque architecture. Here are some examples of rounded arches. Interestingly enough, the height of the arch could only be 2 times the width of the window or doorway, which contributed to the small windows you see in this next slide. In addition to small windows, you can see the circular large towers and thick walls. You will also notice how plain the exterior of these churches are. Here are 2 main styles of vaulting that were common in the Romanesque period. The limitation with these styles included the lack of ability to build high structures because of the weight of the ceiling could not be well distributed over the walls. Features of Gothic architecture include high-reaching churches, pointed arches, ribbed vaulting, flying buttresses, large windows with plenty of natural light, ornate facades, and spires. Here are some examples of Gothic architecture. Flying buttresses were added to Gothic architecture because as the walls got higher, stress fractures began to occur, so they needed something to support them. Ribbed vaulting provides a skeletal structure which requires less material to be used to create a ceiling, allowing for a lighter ceiling. The walls can then be thinner and expand higher. More windows can be added to the higher walls as well. The pointed arches also helped in the expansion of Gothic architecture upward. Unlike the Romanesque arch, which could only have so much height for its width, the pointed arch has an almost unlimited height for its width. This allowed higher windows and higher doors, and this is because all of the pressure that is being placed on that center stone of the pointed arch gets forced straight back down into the ground due to its pointed vertical assembly. Beautiful ornate windows had two purposes, one of which was to allow a lot of natural light into the church, another of which was most of the peasants at this time were illiterate, so therefore the ornate windows had scenes of the Bible played out in them, allowing peasants to learn about the Bible. And lastly, high-reaching spires, which were used to draw people's attentions to the heavens. Again, because this cathedral was built on the cusp in between Romanesque and Gothic architecture, I believe the two towers are reminiscent of the towers present in Romanesque architecture. Some experts might disagree with me. Now that we have examined Romanesque and Gothic architecture, let's take a look at the Gothic influences within Notre Dame. And we will also learn a bit of the history of this region. Notre Dame was one of the first buildings to be built in the Gothic style, which originated in France. This architectural style spread throughout Europe and the world. And now for the Gothic elements of the Notre Dame. It has a Latin cross footprint, and in this picture you can see the large spires, the large amount of windows, the high-reaching church, and the tall, slender construction of the church. Here are the flying buttresses that were added to the church, but were not in the original plans. They were added due to the fact that stress fractures were occurring. Here we can see the large rose window, the spires, the ornate designs on exterior walls, and the pointed archways. Here is an example of the ornate portals on the outside of the buildings, which depict certain scenes from the Bible. Here we can see the ribbed vaulting and how high the ceiling is, as well as how many windows there are and how open the walls are. The interior of the church is full of beautiful Gothic art. Now for the gargoyles. Gargoyle stems from the Latin and French word gargouille, or gargulio, which means throat. These gargoyles were used as gutters to drain water away from the roof. Also, there were chimeras on the Notre Dame as well. Chimeras are just gargoyles without the function of a spout. Many believe that these chimeras were used to ward off evil spirits. Here is a $1 million question. Did the Goths actually inspire Gothic architecture? The story starts with the Goths. Were they really barbarians? To answer this question, let's start with the Romans. They were the dominating force throughout what was Europe until the 5th century. Here is a map of all their territory. The Romans ruled until the 5th century, at which point the Visigoths helped end their supremacy. The Visigoths were a Germanic tribe that had very advanced weaponry, which helped them conquer Rome. If you look at this map, it will show you the exact amount of territory Visigoths came to conquer in southern Europe. Visigoths ruled most of southern Europe until 711 AD, at which point the rise of the Holy Roman Empire occurred. Pope Leo III, looking for a leader of Germanic descent, coronated Charlemagne, the former Frankish king, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The coronation was considered by many one of the most important events of the Middle Ages, as it helped to solidify the rule of the Holy Roman Empire. The conquerors always write history, therefore when the Visigoths took over Rome, and then were later taken over by the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Romans looked down upon them and called them barbarians. It was not until the Renaissance that the French period was called the Gothic period. This was because the Renaissance people looked down upon Gothic architecture. They called it tawdry and obnoxious, so therefore they called it Gothic, which was an insult. No, the Goths were not architecturally inclined at all. But where did the French get their inspiration from? Well, let's take a look. The last thing I want to talk about is what were the inspirations for Gothic movement. After the dark Romanesque period, priests wanted to have more light in the cathedrals because they felt that it created a more inspiration and godlike environment. The priests also wanted spires of the church to reach for the heavens, that way they could connect the parishioners to God. Through the Holy Crusades, architects learned of the Islamic pointed arch, which became a key structure in Gothic architecture and is seen in the front of the Notre Dame. Alright, thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot about Notre Dame and Gothic architecture. Bye.